Hey, welcome back to another great deep dive that we have on This Week in Christian History. And our particular episode today is centered around March 16th in 1895, one of the very early leaders in Southern Baptist history, and certainly within the world of Southern Baptist Seminary education, died, who was Dr. John Albert Broadus. And we are glad to have on with us today Dr. Eric Smith, who is a professor of church history at the Southern Baptist University, how about a seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. And Dr. Smith, thank you for joining us today and lending us your brain and your time.
It's my delight. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, you are here because you are a Broadus scholar and someone who is, as I understand, is working on all kinds of material, including a book on John Broadus. And we couldn't think of anybody better to talk to about that than you. So thank you for joining us.
Well, it's truly my honor. Thank you.
Very good. Well, tell us a little bit about him and why we would be focusing on him to talk about Christian history.
Yeah, I think that Broadus is a worthy subject for your podcast. He is one of the greatest preachers of his generation, certainly among Southern Baptists, but also beyond. He was recognized by just a variety of evangelicals of his day in the mid to late 19th century in America, as well as overseas, as an expert, not only a very gifted preacher, but an expert in the field of homiletics and a teacher of preachers. He was also a very well-regarded scholar in the area of New Testament and philology. He was a textual critic and just a very sharp and gifted guy who is probably best remembered today as one of the four founding faculty members for the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, which at that time was the first Southern Baptist seminary, and Broadus helped lay out the curriculum for that school and really gave his life to seeing it survive and thrive beyond the 19th century. So very important figure, not only to Southern Baptists, but really well beyond.
Yeah, and so the seminary today is in Kentucky, right? But didn't it start in his native land of North Carolina or South Carolina?
Yeah, great question. So the seminary touched all those southern states
Okay.
before all was said and done. It began in Greenville, South Carolina,
Okay.
for the simple reason that South Carolina Baptist gave the lion's share of the needed endowment on the front end, and Furman University, which was there in Greenville, South Carolina, donated some of its resources and books and things. And James P. Boyce, Broadus's fellow founder of the seminary, he was a South Carolina Baptist originally from Charleston. And so the seminary began in Greenville, South Carolina in 1859, and then moved to Louisville, Kentucky, 1877. For a variety of reasons, one of them just being the realities of Reconstruction and the desolation that South Carolina in particular suffered as a result of the Civil War. And so Louisville, Kentucky became a very attractive second home for the seminary. There's a huge Baptist presence there. It's kind of a thriving New South city. There was a railroad there. There's a lot of industry, and it became the new home for the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. It put them in proximity to Baptists all over North America, drew students from many new places, and continues to be the home of Southern Seminary today.
How about that? And so Broadus then went with the seminary, right? I mean, so they kind of packed it all up, and along with the others, Boyce and others that hoofed it up
Yeah,
there,
that's
right?
right. And, that's just one piece of Broadus's commitment to Southern Seminary. Broadus had a very successful and fruitful calling as a pastor and as a university professor in Charlottesville, Virginia. He taught at the University of Virginia, where he was a graduate, and was also a chaplain at the University of Virginia. And he was the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Charlottesville and was beloved across the state, was frequently invited to fill the most prestigious pulpits, not only in Virginia, but really up and down the Atlantic coast, and was really in his early 30s on the rise, set to become one of the premier preachers and pastors of his generation. But then this seminary enterprise presents itself. His friend James P. Boyce, who we've already mentioned, was the passionate leader of this cause. There'd been talk about a Southern Baptist Seminary for a couple of decades at that point, but it was really Boyce who had the vision for a seminary that was uniquely suited to the needs of Baptists, who believed, among other things, that God can call anyone to preach whom he wills. They don't necessarily have to have a classical education. They don't have to be fluent in Latin and Greek and Hebrew already before they can be called to preach. And so Boyce wanted to begin this seminary that was accessible to anyone who God called to preach. Even if they just took one class in preaching or English New Testament or whatever, he wanted to just be a resource to them, while also providing a track for those called to deeper scholarship, who wanted to write the books, who wanted to be Bible translators, who wanted to go to the mission field or whatever. So it was a new, innovative kind of institution, and he and others wanted John Broadus to help design that curriculum. He was very well educated. He'd received a master's degree from the University of Virginia, most prestigious school in the South at that time, probably. And so Broadus was kind of a natural fit to consult with that. And after he designs this curriculum, they say, why don't you just serve on the founding faculty? And that was a wrenching choice for Broadus around 1858, to leave a church that he loves, to leave a very stable and promising career for a very uncertain kind of enterprise. But after a year of wrestling with it, Broadus finally says, the die is cast. I'll do it. If I've been elected by Southern Baptists, then I want to serve. And he really spends the rest of his life giving all that he's got to make that seminary survive. One of the most famous and iconic statements that Broadus ever made was right after the Civil War was over. There's a great question of whether it's wise for the seminary to reopen. People are doing their best just to hold their families together, their local churches, and then maybe their own state Baptist college. I mean, are Southern Baptists really going to give to this central seminary? And Broadus looks at his fellow colleagues and says, suppose we all quietly agree that the seminary may die, but will die first. And Broadus spends the rest of his life really keeping that commitment, doing whatever it takes to raise funds and recruit students and just raise the profile of this institution. And he probably did cut his life a little bit short in the process, like all those founding faculty members, but it stands to this day in no small part through his efforts.
How about that? What and part of your research and the things that you're learning about him, does he did he keep a journal? Did he do letters to people and things like that on just more of a personal level of what might be that pull, right? I mean, I like the academics, but the fact that you might have the skill set and the ability to live in an academic world doesn't necessarily mean that you're the type of person that's going to be a good preacher, that is going to, fill the pulpits up, right? And be able to have people, I mean, or at least the pews up, if nothing else, to have people want to be able to. So that had to be a tussle for him.
Exactly right. Yeah, from the beginning of his career, he's feeling this tension between the academy and the pulpit. He begins his career, if we want to call it that, with what he came to call his double burden, but a double calling of professor of ancient languages at University of Virginia and the pastor of First Baptist Charlottesville. And really for the rest of his life, he's feeling that pull between directly serving the churches and being an evangelist and, as he would say, being directly involved in the work of saving souls versus moving into the academic world, teaching and training and more indirectly shaping the life of the church. And in fact, it was such a pull for him when the idea first presented itself that he turned it down. He was
Huh.
elected by the convention to serve as the founding professor of New Testament and homiletics, and he turned it down at first. His whole church petitioned him to turn it down. Half the state of Virginia seemed to rise up and tell him not to leave. And so he didn't, and he stayed in his church. But it seemed to keep gnawing at him over the course of the next several months. Some of the other electees also declined because Broadus declined, and so he kind of felt responsible for all that. And just over the course of several months of deliberation and we trust the Lord's leadership, he ends up accepting that post and really never looks back after that.
How about that? Hey, we are enjoying our conversation with Dr. Eric Smith, who is a scholar on John Broadus, one of the founding faculty members and soon to be president of the Southern Baptist Seminary, now headquartered in Louisville, Kentucky. We're enjoying our conversation with Dr. Smith. But tell me a little bit more about the type of people who would be, for us lay folks, okay, to say, teaching you to preach. I mean, what is as compared to, well, hey, I think I've got the gift, and I think that I've got the ability to stand up and deliver and to, project or whatever it is that we might talk from a pure communication standpoint. What about that whole thing of teaching preachers on how to preach, even if they understand what the Greek may or may not say?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Broadus wants to affirm, like any honest reader of the New Testament, that it's not any university or seminary that can make a preacher. Only God can make a preacher, right? It's God by the endowment of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. He's the one who calls and equips and then uses men of God to proclaim his word. So Broadus believed that with all of his heart. But he also believed that from a human perspective, we want to be as responsible as we can to refine those gifts and to develop them, and that there are things that we can do to be more effective communicators, to be more, he would even use the word, more persuasive speakers. And so one of Broadus's greatest legacies is a preaching manual that he published in 1871 called A Treatise on the Preparation and Delivery of Sermons.
Huh.
And in that book, Broadus just lays out kind of his method for how to prepare a sermon effectively. And he draws not only from biblical texts, but also from some of the ancient rhetoricians like Cicero and Aristotle and Demosthenes and some of these guys. And he walks you through how to gather your materials, which for a preacher would involve learning how to study a passage of scripture and do hermeneutics and then faithfully communicate what that's saying. He talks about style. He talks about delivery. He was a great proponent of not reciting memorized speeches in a mechanical way, not reading a manuscript just glued to the pulpit, but instead having it down in you sufficiently that you can connect with your audience and be free with your delivery. And he does such a good job, I think, of analyzing the pros and cons of all those approaches and holding together both the undeniable essential element of God's blessing on the preacher and God's enablement, along with the human responsibility to do all we can to prepare faithfully and effectively, and understand what makes for effective communication. He believed in both of those things, and I think that's why he was a compelling trainer of preachers. That book that he wrote, A Treatise on the Preparation and Delivery of Sermons, it went through so many reprintings and was translated into other languages. It's considered to be the book that's trained more preachers than any other preaching manual in certainly in American history.
Yeah.
So
You just took my other question. That's right. That was, I mean, it was, as Barbara Mandrell might say, it sounds like he was country before country was cool, right?
that's right.
Even just coming up with the idea from a practical standpoint, because he had been in the pulpit for as long as he would, I guess, to say, this is the kind of thing that I think students could really learn from, just to be able to, here's the ABC 1, 2, 3, take you from the beginning to the end. check these boxes, make sure that, and I'm obviously, maybe dumbing it down in a way that's not fair, but
Yeah, that's
this is what's there to do. And I just, not only the idea that this is something that needed to be done, or that there was a niche that wasn't getting filled or something that needed to happen, but how many other seminaries anywhere around the world, anywhere, were really doing that kind of thing? Was that an early on thing that he brought out?
Yeah, it kind of gets in on the ground floor of a lot of homiletical literature, I guess. In his generation, you begin to see more preaching manuals coming out. And so he was not totally alone in that, but he was really the first, certainly the first Southern Baptist to produce a work like this. And his book ends up being the most popular even among other denominations and other traditions. So I've read all kinds of letters of like a Presbyterian minister's wife from Missouri writing him a letter saying, "Can you send me a copy of your book? I want to give it to my husband for Christmas." You've got some Methodist reviewers who are praising it in their kind of book review section of their journal, saying, there's a little dose of Calvinism in there, but it's only a homeopathic dose. Nothing that's going to poison any of our people. It's safe. He's mostly just going to point you to Jesus and to the Bible and tell you how to preach, and we recommend it. And so it really had a wide appeal, just as one sign of Broadus's appeal as a preacher and as a homiletician. He became the first Southern Baptist to be invited to deliver the very prestigious Beecher preaching lectures at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut in 1889. To this day, he remains just one of 3 Southern Baptists to ever have that honor, but it's recognized as kind of the premier preaching lectureship in America. And
Wow.
he delivers those in 1889. That's one of the capstones of his career, getting close to the end of his life.
Wow, how about that? And I guess they just don't pull your name out of a hat, right? For that honor to be able to
Yeah,
go
he's
there.
very highly regarded among both kind of country Baptist folks out in rural South Carolina, but also has a very strong appeal to kind of the most scholarly, urbane, East Coast type people who before whom he was frequently standing and delivering.
How about all that? How about that? So, as an academic, I guess for him as one who was uh, also had that part where he would understand you got to be able to, and again I'm making up words, right? But you got to be able to know what it is you are preaching about, and you've got to make sure
Uh,
that the doctrine you're coming up with is really solid and
uh,
based on this scholarship piece. So it can't just be me teaching you how to go to preaching. Okay. It's got to be the
yeah,
doctrinal pieces too, I would think, right?
Yeah, to quote a more recent preaching manual that I've read, you got to get it right and get it across. You want to get
Ah,
the message right and get the message across. And he's someone who's very committed to both of those things. So, as a professor of New Testament, he's passionate about understanding the Greek and exegeting a passage faithfully. And Broadus is sometimes called the Prince of Expositors because of his commitment to expository preaching, which is a $5 word that means to bring out of the text what is there, to bring out
mm,
what's there, and to explain what the passage means or what the verse means. He was very committed to teaching the Bible, and yet not in a kind of a dry, merely academic lecture style, but hopefully in the power of the Holy Spirit, directed to accessing the hearts of men and women and pushing them to get decisive in their relationship with Christ.
absolutely. So, tell us about the book. Tell us about where you are in that process. Writing is writing one is as a tense is something that I've used for quite some time for myself. Yeah, I'm writing this thing. How close am I to really getting it done? Maybe something else altogether. So, tell us
Well,
about
I've got
writing
plenty
the
of
book.
projects like that. I'm grateful to the Lord that this project is actually done. It's
Oh,
completed. It's under contract, and it's kind of in the publication process right now. So I'm very thankful for that.
Fantastic. Where will we be able to find copies of that for those
Well,
who
you're
want to
very
learn
kind to
more?
ask. Yeah, I'm really thrilled that LSU Press is going to be publishing this book on Broadus, and Lord willing, it will be available by the first of next year. So maybe this time next year, it will be available wherever fine books are sold. And the tentative title is Between Worlds: John A. Broadus, the Southern Baptist Seminary, and the Prospects of the New South. So it'll all be all about Broadus's life and ministry, and also kind of his Southern identity. He was a
Mm,
pretty important figure in Southern culture in the second half of the 19th century. And I think we can learn a lot about that time period just by studying his life.
right, right, right. Sometimes some of the best ways to learn may be things that you wish you would have known or somebody else could have told you, right? If we could do it all over again, would we do it that way? And
Yeah.
there's certainly a lot of those, particularly in Southern Baptist life and others, as we reflect on it, currently, to be able to look back and go, I really wish they would have done this, or I really wish they would have not done that.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, what do we pull from that in a way that we were able to make that relative to today?
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us and participating with us on this, Dr. Eric Smith, who is right there at the Southern Theological Seminary and an author we will be anxiously looking for a copy of your book on John Broadus, who we bring to our mind on we won't say his death date. We'll say the day he went to glory. How about that? That was
Amen. Amen.
on March 16th of 1895. And if folks want to learn more about what we're doing at the Center for Christian History, please check us out at centerforchristianhistory.com, and you can learn all about upcoming podcast episodes and other things that we are doing to help people learn more about Christian history. Thanks so much.